So to get us started, it's really a tremendous honor, and forgive me, I need to go and grab my piece of paper here, and I'll step back up, to introduce Fabio Parasecoli. Fabio is an associate professor and coordinator of food studies at the New School for Social Research, or I guess it is called the New School these days, right? And it shows you how old I am. And he's going to give us our first peek at how media actually begins to shape our images of the food system. Fabio, thank you so much.
So I'd like to start just with a little video, and we'll take it from there. Sorry. Can you click? I clicked when.
Here you go, Leo.
Leo.
Who are you? And how did you know my name?
I am Mufius, and I know a lot about you. Have you heard of the Meatrix?
The Meatrix?
Do you want to know what it is?
Okay.
The Meatrix is all around you, Leo. It is the story we tell ourselves about where meat and animal products come from. This family farm is a fantasy. Take the blue pill and stay here in the fantasy. Take the red pill and I'll show you the truth. Welcome to the real world.
Wow! What is this horrible place?
This is a factory farm, Leo. Places like this are where most eggs, milk, and meat come from.
How did this happen?
I'll show you. In the mid-20th century, greedy agriculture corporations began modifying sustainable family farming to maximize their profits at great cost to both humans and animals. Factory farming was born. Animals are packed as closely together as possible. Most never see sunlight, touch ground, or get fresh air. Many can't even turn around. These cruel conditions cause fights and disease amongst the animals. To fix this, the corporate machine began systematic mutilations, practices such as debeaking chickens. And they started adding a constant dosage of antibiotics to their feed just to keep these poor wretches alive. This overuse of antibiotics breeds super strains of resistant disease-causing germs. Every day we get closer to an epidemic that cannot be stopped.
Ew! What's that smell?
12 million pounds of excrement. This pollutes the air and groundwater. That's why communities near factory farms often suffer from high levels of related sicknesses.
Well, it smells like
And what's more, factory farming corporations have been destroying communities and mistreating their workers for decades. Since 1950, over 2 million small hog farms have disappeared. If they continue at this rate, there'll be no real independent family farms left. That is the Meatrix, Leo. The lie we tell ourselves about where our food comes from. But it's not too late. There is a resistance.
Count me in! So how do we stop him, Mufius?
We are going to spread the word, but it's you, the consumer, who has the real power. Don't support the factory farming machine. There's a world of alternatives. And I'll show you what you can do to escape the Meatrix.
So what I found extremely interesting in this video, and that's why I presented it, it shows how the connection between money and media can be quite complicated. Here there is a clear form of resistance that passes through a form of media that might be used elsewhere to advertise other kinds of food and other kinds of ideas. So my point is that when we talk about food and media, we actually have competing worldviews that are fighting to become the mainstream. And I put up this example, which I find very interesting. You have Super Size Me, which became very popular, a movie that shows how fast food can actually hurt you. And then you have Fathead, another movie, documentary, very similar, that actually wants to prove the opposite point. There is no proof that eating bad food is bad for you. There is no right for anybody to tell me how I want to eat and whatnot. So there is actually sort of a competition to get the attention of the audiences and to assert one's point of view as the mainstream. So the problem is of technically saying encoding, decoding. So I want to put a message out. I have to put it in a code of media, in a certain way of showing things, of using words, of placing words and things in an advertising or in a commercial. Very often, though, the people that are at the other end of the communication do not get the same message or do not get the message you want them to get. So there is a problem, and here my question is, does communication always work as planned? Here there are some KFC advertisings that might be a little strange for the brain. So unthink KFC. So basically KFC is saying, no, we have to unthink ourselves. But at the same time, then they launch the Double Down sandwich, which I don't know if you're familiar with, is 2 pieces of meat with no bread, fried, of course. So are we what we eat, or are we what we think we eat? That's very important. And I think media influences us not only in our food choices, but also in the way we think of ourselves as consumers. And that's very important because when we embrace some sort of identity, we want to embrace that lifestyle. We want to consume accordingly. So very often what happens, the message is not only about what you should eat, but who you are as an eater. So the media impact is very strong. Of course, we are very aware of dynamics of communication, but we should not just think about food TV or advertising, and we should figure out the ways that in which media influence the way we think of ourselves. In this sense, pop culture is very important, and my last book was all about it. So how food representations and food media become sort of an arena where different models of body images, personal identities, also social projects compete with each other. And here we have another little video, if you can launch it, please.
When you're on a diet, hungry is there to sabotage you every step of the way. That's why Weight Watchers created the brand new Momentum program. Now you can conquer hungry and other things that stop you from losing weight. Call 1-800-214-5533 now. Learn new strategies like choosing filling foods so you don't eat when you're tempted or stressed out. So you can lose weight and keep it off. Go to WeightWatchers.com/momentum or call 1-800-214-5533. Show hungry who's boss. With the new Momentum program and free registration, the time to join is now. Call 1-800-214-5533. Weight Watchers. Stop dieting. Start living.
I found this commercial interesting because the goal is to sell a food product. In a way, this is a food product, how to eat less food. But at the same time, the commercial works on a lot of assumptions. Before Joseph was talking about assumptions. And here the assumptions are very strong about gender roles and body image. So women that look at this commercial basically find themselves in front of representations of what women are, women working, women dealing with their hunger. So how do they relate with these images? Do they oppose them? Do they embrace them? Do these assumptions reinforce gender roles and ideas about what body image is acceptable? So through video, sometimes there is also a normalization of gender roles. And here, it's a form of media that is pretty, well, I mean, it was new, but it's video games. Very important for children. So what happens when we have the Cooking Mama cook-off, that basically is there to teach girls how to cook. Well, actually, they cannot teach you how to cook because there is no stove, there is no real material. But what they do is they normalize the idea that, yes, what else should girls do? Of course, they should learn how to cook. But of course, media also play with gender roles around food. And this is a Dolce & Gabbana advertisement. And here they play with the idea of the traditional Italian woman at the table preparing food. So she's doing all that she's supposed to do socially, but at the same time, she comes across as not your normal housewife. Well, that works for men too. It's not only women. And I think that's very important. Recently, media are realizing that men are very important targets when it comes to food. And not only food, but nutrition elements. And here we have very important sort of ideals that are proposed to men. So if you don't eat just junk food, but you eat our pills, you will become like this. Of course, the assumption is that this is the ideal. This is the body image we would all like to get. So in a way, the media are moving not only to normalizing ideas about women, but also about men. And more men are having problems with their own body images. I work in a college with college-age students, and quite a few male students present those sorts of problems. Working out, but how do I eat when I work out? And if I have to eat at certain times of the day to maintain my muscle mass, I cannot go out with my friends because otherwise I'll break my diet, and so on and so forth. So the consequences are quite heavy. Other video?
I'm good. Be honest here, I'm good.
My bad. I'm good.
I'm good. Ready? Go!
Men can take anything.
I'm good.
Except the taste of Diet Cola. Until now. Pepsi Max, the first Diet Cola for men.
This is good.
Talk about gender roles. I found also interesting the genre that the marketers have chosen. It is the Jackass genre. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's extremely popular both on TV and in the movies. And they know that that genre is particularly popular with a specific audience of young males. So once again, food is used, I mean, here the commercial wants to sell a product, but it has to play with the assumptions about what a young male is, what a young male thinks of himself, and what a young male wants to project to others. So dieting and males don't go together. Men don't go on diets. I don't know if you heard the commercial. They say, oh yeah, I eat very healthy food when I'm on... It's quite weird the way they phrase the connection with food. So they had to remake a Diet Coke, soda that was acceptable for men. How do you do it? You connect it with this sort of happy-go-lucky Jackass attitude that is very acceptable for young males. So in a way, they are negotiating through food what young males think of themselves. The question of media can be very, very subtle. I'll start talking about food writing and food cookbooks, recipes. Very often we just think that a cookbook is something to help you cook. You want to make something, you read the instructions, you produce it. But actually, when you use a cookbook, you enter in a dialogue with it. The cookbook is just not a neutral reflection of food. It's an edited work. The way the cookbook frames the food you're dealing with, the languages it uses, the images it uses, gives you a different idea of what that food should be. And I think this is a very interesting examples. We have Southern food and Southern cooking, but you can see that the assumptions behind those two cookbooks are quite different. And here we're in the US, I don't need to get into explanations about that. But on one side, you have the genteel Southern gentleman, and on the other hand, you had the elderly black woman talking about Southern cooking. So what's Southern cooking? The cookbook is not just a neutral representation of Southern cooking. It brings with itself lots of ideas about race, class, what cooking is. So there is a growing awareness of this. So there is an attempt at reshaping identities through cookbooks. And here I chose two examples. How food in black culture is being represented. On one side, you have Sylvia's Family Soul Food Cookbook. And the images it presents, both on the cover and inside, are about tradition, about family connection, about Southern food that can be very satisfying, but maybe not particularly healthy. On the other hand, you have the Vegan Soul Kitchen. So you can see that the term soul here is being negotiated. What does it refer to? Does a black person have to embrace that traditional soul food to be part of the community, or are there other ways to interpret and live from within that soul? And here you have Brian Terry. He was here in New York before, now he works on the West Coast, that is trying to change that image and create soul food that is connected with the tradition, but at the same time is healthy and acceptable for a new upcoming black community. Very often, ethnic identities can be contested through food representations. On one side, you have the nostalgic idea here. For instance, I'm using the Italian-American ethnic group. So the cookbook on the left uses the idea of the past, of the tradition, and it has this nostalgic element. It's interesting that the nostalgia is not about Italy, it's about Little Italy. So it's really about the Italian-American experience. They don't care about previous experiences. On the other side, you have the Sopranos Family Cookbook. So, which, by the way, has been written also by Italian-Americans and has been very successful in the Italian-American community. So there is a negotiation of the identity within the community that is very lively. I don't know if you heard conversation about, I don't know, Jersey Shore, the MTV series. There is a very lively conversation also about the way food is represented in this series. You have this young kids from all over the East Coast that identify themselves as Guidos. So it's a term that many Italian Americans are not very affectionate towards. But they embrace it, and they recreate this invented tradition of being Italian American. So whatever they do, they get together on Sundays to make their Sunday meal, because that's what they think is being Italian American. So they are part of these negotiations, but they are recreating their identity through food, and they are projecting to lots of kids who are into the show these ideas about what the Italian American food traditions might be. Cooking is a way that sometimes powers and governments use to control their citizens. There is a lot of discussion about biopowers. Since food is really part of what we are, It's part of our daily activities. It determines what we do, what we buy, how we cook, with whom we cook. At times, it's important for governments and other agencies of powers to control the citizens through what they cook, through what they produce, through what they consume. And here we've got two clear examples from the American past. You have the Victory Gardens, so women were called to cook in a certain way, but also to produce their food to participate in the war effort. And you also have the wartime cookbook, that it's a practical guide about saving food. So it's not only cooking, but once again, through the images and the suggestions offered by the media, people can embrace different kind of identities and goals for themselves. Also, class can be quite complicated, and here we have different versions of the sort of white trash cooking. On your left, you have the sort of unadulterated idea of what white trash could be, and it's clearly sort of tongue-in-cheek, sort of ironic. On the other hand, you have this identity embraced as something valuable and serious. So you have the casserole queens. So even it's not just about ethnic groups, but it becomes also about class. So depending on how cookbooks frame the recipes and the people behind the recipes, readers can get different ideas and can participate in the constructions of these social concepts. Food can be used also in political debates. And this is something from Italy. I'm from Italy. I don't know if you're aware, in the north of Italy now we have a very big party that wants to secede from the rest. It's called the Northern League. And so they've started using food as a way to talk to their constituencies and be very direct about what is Italian and what is not. So on the left they say yes to polenta, which is basically grits, no to couscous. They don't know that couscous has been in Italy since the 9th century, while polenta only arrived in the 16th. That doesn't matter, because their goal is political. They want to create the idea that there is a food that is traditional to that part of Italy, which underlines the fact that they are a separate cultural identity that deserves to be independent. And then you have a cookbook called La Cucina Padana, so the cooking of Padania. They call this area of northern Italy Padania. So this cookbook, again, is not neutral. The assumption behind it is that there is a separate region of Italy with its own traditions. So the book innocently reflects these traditions, but actually it is constructing them. It is creating them. It is inventing them as it's written and as it's published. So I would stop here, and I guess we have... All right?
Great. Let's give him a big hand. So Fabio, one of the clear takeaways for me in listening to you is that I'm engaged in a constant negotiation about who I am, what class I'm part of, what my body image should be. That's being, it's sort of a dialogue between me and the media. An interesting takeaway. I guess I want to give you guys a chance to ask any questions that are on your mind to Fabio about the role of media. This was our kind of foundational conversation, understanding sort of the structure of it. When we come back after break, we're going to talk about media from the eyes of people who are practicing it today in a number of different forums. But questions from the group? Please, right here, Susan. Let me get a microphone to you.
I have to admit that, all along I've always known that, the stereotyping of women's body images has always been there, very much in media. But I have to admit that I've really never thought about the stereotyping that's really been happening probably in the past 5, maybe 10 years since Men's Health magazine probably came out with those covers of, what it is to be a good, healthy body image of a man. And are we seeing more advertising like that or less? And is there, women have always have done backlashes against, why the media image of girls is not good. I haven't really read a lot about men and boys.
No, there is no backlash. It's embraced as something that it's normal and it's objective. You can see different versions of these male bodies and the way males should relate to food in different magazines. For instance, you mentioned Men's Health. But then you can go to the bodybuilders magazines and you would have a completely different take of what men's bodies should be. So you have different, let's say, ideals that are competing for the attentions of the consumers. And this is something that is very important for food marketers because they have to understand what men want for themselves and what kinds of foods would respond to these needs and these desires in a way. So there is a great attention, and I think we'll see more and more of that as men become more open about their body image problems, which is, as you said, quite new.
Thank you. Other questions from the group? For Fabio, over on the side, please.
Since you work in a college setting, I was just wondering what you're seeing among that age group in terms of their attitudes. Are they sensitive to this kind of marketing, et cetera?
Many of the students are actually very sensitive to problems of food systems and health and nutrition and food justice. But at the same time, they are, in their teen years or maybe in the early 20s. So sometimes they don't have the money to access the foods that they would desire, and they have to negotiate also their position. So I'd like to eat healthy, organic, farmer market food, but I don't have the money. So I end up eating, ramen. That's their reality. So depending on what they can afford, they can negotiate. But I can tell you there is a great interest in making the food system better, also in a very sort of selfish way for their own health and their own future.
In terms of their sensitivity to the messaging, I mean, obviously, I'm sure your class is raising their consciousness about it, but do they have an anger about it? Are they accepting of it?
It depends on the students. I wouldn't talk about anger, but I can see that when they start thinking, they start reacting to it, and they want to figure out ways to change things. Also, when it comes to these messages, they become more self-aware. They don't want to be dupes. They want to be proactive in a way.
Let's go here. We've got another question here. We've got time for probably two more after this. So 1, 2, 3. Okay.
Hi there. I work for Share Our Strengths, which is a national anti-hunger organization, and I run Cooking Matters, which is a program that teaches families how to cook healthy and affordable meals. And we essentially we're using volunteers to teach low-income families how to eat healthy meals. And so sometimes if you go in with the message of saying, oh, we're here to talk about eating right, I mean, I've heard the stories of participants that are saying, oh, you mean eating white. And that's what, they think that you're here, that's what, it ties directly to what you're saying in terms of that this really is an issue of identity, and it's not just about and that we need to be careful in terms of offering our health messages or sustainability messages, that all of this needs to be offered in a context that feels accessible for folks. And I know that I'm sort of curious what sort of practical advice you might have sort of coming out of sort of studying all of that.
The practical advice is to go there first and learn what their actual way of eating is, what their traditions are, and within that framework, what you can change gradually without offending them, without making them feel like you're the white missionary going to save them. That doesn't work. For instance, now there is work with Hispanic communities to see what kind of fresh food can be grown here in the region to be offered, so that it is local and it is fresh, but it's still the food they would like to use for their traditional dishes. And at the same time, then in a second phase, you can get into a dialogue. Say, okay, so this is your food, and I respect it, and I show you I respect it, and I love it. Maybe you can integrate different things. I think it has to be gradual, and it has to come from a place of respect and understanding of where they come from.
Thank you. We had a couple of questions. We're right here. So let's go here, sir, and then you'll be the last one for this.
I was wondering if you could speak at all to the other side of the media. Do you see people creating an identity around the food movements that has influence? I mean, because basically we saw
that's why, no, absolutely. That's working. That's why the first video I showed was the Meatrix, because there is a growing awareness of these dynamics, and also people on the other side are trying to use media and use pop culture to convey their messages. Now, this is you're absolutely right. But first you have to understand these dynamics to work them from inside out. And that is definitely happening. But there is a problem of financing and money. Do the two groups have the same access to financing and funding? So sometimes groups that work, let's say in the counterculture, have to become creative because they do not have the means to practice media in the same way, for instance, a food advertising company can.
Thank you. One last question.
Tracy Sides. There were two things that really struck me about your presentation, and one was, and I was really glad to hear it, I think you added in the third M, and that was meaning, and really talking about what's going on inside the consumer. And the second being that very dynamic nature between money media and that individual, and I liked hearing the terms you used about the media both reflecting but also creating. And finally, this kind of leads to my question, and that was, you also used the phrase about living from within, and that really struck a chord as far as the personal meaning aspect of this dynamic. And I wonder, you've talked about it a little bit, but could you comment on what you think the role of consciousness, of a conscious consumer is in all this?
There is a whole lot of research being done on embodiment. So how we experience our body and how this experience interacts with our identity, what we think of ourselves, our emotions. And I think this is fundamental for media to understand, because the result of these interactions that happens within each of us, but that it's also open to community, to the society, to the global world, to pop culture. We negotiate in different ways who we think we are, and as a consequence, what we like. In a way, we end up embracing lifestyles or images, ideals of ourselves that we can express through consumption.
Thanks so very much. Fabio Parasecoli. Thank you.
Thank you.